Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Leading us through today's discussion of the greatest bot threats to platforms and how to tackle them will be our Senior Business Development Manager, James Oakes. James has been working in bot management for more than 3 years now. Most of that time has been spent helping leading gaming and media organizations to understand and quantify the impact of bots. James also works closely with Netacea's product and threat teams to research emerging bot trends across industries. Over to you, James.
Thanks, Danny. Thank you very much for that introduction, and welcome everybody to today's webinar. So, what do we mean by a bot? What is a bot in its essence? Well, from search engines to chatbots, bots are fundamental to helping us navigate the internet. But there are also bad bots used by malicious actors to automate nefarious activity and ultimately profit from it. A common example of this, bots can be used for account takeover attacks to resell those accounts. Most often this happens on service provider accounts or accounts with gamification. And here we've got a couple of examples of those good and bad bots. We all know that bots can be helpful for our business in terms of SEO tools, in terms of security scanners and uptime checkers. But we need to recognize that there are dedicated bots out there, ones that have been designed specifically for credential stuffing, specifically for scraping, and a new threat of things like sneaker bots and sniping bots as well. But there's a big difference between hackers and bots. So what is that? So a hacker ultimately is looking for vulnerabilities to exploit on your business's websites or apps or APIs, whereas bots are tools used by hackers and fraudsters to scale legitimate activity to their advantage, ultimately to abuse your business logic. But what goes into these bots as an ecosystem is huge. The bot market now is at a stage where it's grown into its own ecosystem, and you're often being targeted by a collective of people working together, some providing services to the ecosystem and not focusing on attacking businesses. But some of those services can be providers of specialized software, such as Sniper, which is used for credential stuffing. That we have sellers of credentials or people who just give them away. We have businesses that sell and steal bandwidth to provide proxies. Some of these now will become residential proxies that have been used by these bot orchestrators. There are tool makers out there that offer 24/7 support and bespoke configurations. There is full service businesses that can do everything I've already mentioned. And this is all backed by public and dark web facing marketplaces where people often sell them with guarantee due to mass availability. So we see guarantees that if some credentials, for example, don't work, they will replace all the credentials that don't work with ones that do. They are that confident nowadays in this ecosystem. But what this means is that businesses in media, video gaming, and the marketplaces, they're fighting an industry. They're not just fighting individuals. So why are bots a threat to you? Well, the risk ultimately derives from the targeting that automated bot technology facilitates. If we take DDoS, for example, the aim of a DDoS attack is for mass destruction and disruption to a company. Sometimes it can be used to hold businesses to ransom, but the point is that they're very obvious. Okay, targeted bot attacks are different. They take a subtle approach. Typically, targeted attacks aim to go unnoticed for as long as possible in order to wreak the most havoc. But whether that's acquisition of sensitive data and funds or carrying out fraudulent activity, they want to stay under the radar as long as possible. Now, attackers use a variety of techniques to access business and customer data to carry out fraud. These attacks threaten the target organization's customers, reputation, finances. With this in mind, we recently commissioned an independent survey of enterprise organizations in the UK. We wanted to find out what they know about the bot challenge. The objective of this, was to create a threat report using this data that would raise awareness and help increase the understanding of the risks that bots pose to online businesses. Now on the screen are some responses from the online gaming and streaming organizations. At a glance, we know these businesses recognize that bots are a threat, and even they know what those risks look like. So let's find out what these targeted attacks on gaming and streaming platforms look like in the real world. It was reported that Netflix gained about 16 million new signups during lockdown, which put greater demand on the platform, increasing the opportunities for bad actors to attack whilst hiding in plain sight with this increased traffic profile. But amongst the top automated attacks observed by streamer services during the pandemic was actually fake account creation and account takeover attacks. Now, fake account creation is an automated bot threat that cyber criminals use to commit fraudulent acts. Sometimes it's to leverage sign-up incentives, but also it's to mask the true attack. Again, fake accounts are another great example of business logic abuse. If we take internal security and fraud teams as an example, these teams often use a success to failure ratio on their logins as a trigger to know if they're under a credential stuffing attack. But by these fraudsters be signing into a fake account successfully before and after attempting a breach of a real user's account, it doesn't flag up on that internal trigger. And account takeovers are also rife. This type of identity theft occurs when cyber criminals are gaining unauthorized access to an account that belongs to somebody else. And account takeovers put the account holder at risk of fraud and leave the business exposed to financial and reputational damage. And if we look at credential stuffing attacks are amongst the most commonly occurred attack methods of account takeover in the past few years, and we've seen these rising exponentially. If we look between November 2017 and May 2019, it's an estimated 55 billion credential stuffing attacks occurred, and 12 billion of these attacks were targeted to online gaming alone. These figures from 2019 just indicate the scale of the threat, and it's one that we can only expect to increase as the years continue. But particularly when we consider the number of users who continue to use the same password across multiple accounts, you start to understand why these attacks are increasing. This practice puts organizations at risk of business logic exploits as attackers see the weakest link in their core functionality. It's the users, it's the consumers, it's us as humans. I think a great example at this stage is if we look at last year, and last year we saw a number of databases called the collection being brought together. Now, the collection pulled together multiple recent and historical breaches of users' emails and passwords into a single source, which could be used by fraudsters and their bot ecosystem. But by using those tools and bots, they were able to carry out widespread credential stuffing attacks on thousands of websites, applications, and across APIs, leading to account takeover situations, impacting the reputation and loss to businesses. But I think we need to take a step back and just think, what actually happened before the collection? So, what happened before the collection became available to the wider use of fraudsters? Well, it all starts with a simple breach. Simple breach of access to customers' login information. But what organizations, in my experience, tend to assume is that immediately after a breach, those credentials pop up on the dark web forums. But this simply isn't the case. The first route of any fraudster looking to leverage this information is they want to capitalize, they want to profit on that list themselves. Often as a way to have as much coverage on this as possible, that they'll work with known associates on this. and they will carry out, fraudulent actions or work across those credentials to find out, what sites they're valid on. Now, how long this actual process takes is a complete unknown. This process might take them a week, it could take a few months, it could take a few years. But the point is that the credentials from that initial breach may not actually appear on dark web forums for quite some time. There's no way to predict this. But this also brings another point, and it's also one I've raised with some of the businesses I work with, but where they have tools that scan dark web forums. This is where they can fall short, because ultimately they're not effective until the data is already in the bot ecosystem. But it can be quite some time before it reaches that forum. It can be used by the hacker's own ecosystem for quite some time. But route 2, we're now at a stage where fraudsters, they've validated those credentials, they validated them, they want to sell those lists at higher value with accompanying information. So, if they validated those credentials across, a handful of websites, they'll sell those details, and they will say if there's a registered credit card in there, for example, or if that customer has a particular subscription package, or if in the online gaming industry, if they have skins or upgrades for their particular game. So that's one way in which these fraudsters are profiteering from these situations. But the other part of the list that they haven't been able to validate is still valid. Their original breach list still has resale value. Anybody who's looking to target the organization from that initial breach can just purchase these for highly targeted attacks, ultimately abusing your logic, because they will already know that those details are valid on your site. So the answer to this question is it's quite simple. Malicious activity costs your business money, precious resources, and damages reputation. However, at the moment, it seems that the majority of enterprise organizations across gaming and streaming are only investing 10% of their security budget into bot management. Now, the positive, though, is that these businesses are becoming more aware of bots and their impact. So we are likely to see that figure increase as bots have greater impacts on these industries, which is, it's a great way forward. Here we can see that gaming and streaming organization, said that the direct cost to their business as a result of bots was customer loss. It's easy to understand why, but we also need to think about the indirect losses. So the indirect losses as bots consume things like web application resources, and the cost of resource consumption has been exacerbated in recent months as millions of consumers have turned towards online gaming, content streaming services, throughout the whole COVID-19 pandemic for their entertainment. And here we can see the damage and cost of this. Just under 20% of your application's resources are effectively going to waste. That's a huge number for any organization. And the situation is that bots are hiding out in genuine user traffic. And as we've discussed, their intent will be varied. They might be carrying out a credential stuffing attack, might be creating fake accounts, or just scraping your content. But the point is that you're paying for increased infrastructure that just isn't being used by real users. It's facilitating bad bot behavior. So the challenge, you and your business is facing is identifying the intent of this bot behavior on your platform in order to stop those bots in their tracks. So this brings me on to the next point. How are we going to tackle these? So let's think about the steps you can take to proactively mitigate against that kind of bot traffic. Well, 45% of gaming and streaming respondents in our research stated that they've got a full bot management solutions in place, which is great. But what does that mean? And crucially, is that bot management solution providing the right level of defense? And the reason I say that is because it's important to understand that accurately identifying bots, it's not an exact science. When it comes down to it, there's no real difference between a request that is made by a human and a request that is made by a bot. Web application firewalls, load balancers, CDNs, many of these providers provide bundled bot management solutions, but they're just no longer effective anymore at stopping these bots. The fact of the matter is that bots can now bypass a lot of these security measures. If we take capture, for example, bots can now link to Google's reverse image search, or more advanced ones actually call out to capture farms, which, if you weren't aware of the capture farm, they are organizations that pay real humans to do nothing but solve captures for these bots all day, every day. And the majority of bot defenses available on the market today rely on client-side traps such as JavaScript, but this is also flawed. In this instance, not only is the user's privacy at risk, but all the defenses are in the realms of the attacker. It's taken a security by obscurity approach. Unlike anything, it's an arms race. And what we need to do is find a solution that allows us to stay ahead of the threat by understanding the behavior of user activity, and also identifying anomalous behavior. And that's where the server-side approach comes in. We need to monitor how the visitor is interacting with your infrastructure. But how's that work? What do we mean by server-side? Well, that's Netacea's unique approach. So Netacea needs to fully understand the client's system we're protecting. Okay, each business and their online estate is unique. It has its own patterns of usage. You have your own areas of importance. You have your own customer experience. Okay, and by using our analysis engine and working collaboratively with the customer, we get to learn more about the systems that we're protecting, and specifically what traffic patterns look like to those systems and to that business, even down to specific areas like registration and login, checkout, and so on. With this knowledge, Netacea understands the typical usage patterns of the platform we're protecting. And although web platforms have constant streams of varying usage depending on things such as trading patterns, time zones, marketing activity, activity outside of these patterns often, well, not always, does indicate bot activity. So by comparing visitors to all other visitors on the platform at that point in time, and against behaviors we know are good, we're able to identify and stop complex threats immediately. And this is where our intent analytics engine comes into it. It combines all these elements to build a picture of normal, both in the context of our knowledge of bot activity, and also how that relates to your systems. Now, as a result of the server-side approach, fundamentally, it gives us far more visibility over user activity. Here, what you can see on screen is just a couple of examples from both report backs to existing customers and proof of value summary reports as well. But just to explain what you're seeing here, the bottom left graph, we can see the amount of requests each month that we identified as bot-related traffic. Now, the interesting point of this is that we were brought in as a defense in depth approach by the customer, and we were actually further downstream. We were detecting this bot activity after it had already passed a bundled bot solution from this customer's edge provider. We actually used this graph at a 6-month report back with the exec team. The bottom right was when we were benchmarked against a leading web application firewall provider. This customer had a real issue with scrapers, and what you can see here is the immediate impact when we started to apply our mitigations to this traffic, once we started to understand what they were targeting and why. But personally, I think the top right just really demonstrates how effective Netacea is. The orange that you can see in the graph shows the number of credential stuffing attacks that was detected by both a dedicated bot management solution, so a client-side bot management solution being used by an internal security team at the customer site. Now, this graph was used in the final stage of the proof of value, and in the final week, what you can see here is that we not only spotted more bot attacks on those volumetric days, so you can see the blue. So if we look on that Friday evening, the blue part of the graph above the orange, we were spotting more in terms of bot traffic on the volumetric. But what I think was key, and I actually think is the reason why this business is now a customer of ours, is between that Wednesday and that Friday, we were detecting very complex attacks, very sophisticated attacks, which were taking a low and slow approach. 2 days of low and slow credential stuffing that would have otherwise been missed by the internal security team and client side based approach. But to summarize, I think today we have, hopefully you've learned a little bit more about the ecosystem, a little bit more about the threats, but we need to recognize that bots are sophisticated. It's not just a rules-based approach anymore. It's not just about blocking IPs anymore. We have to take a sophisticated approach to a very sophisticated problem. But bots are vital. Okay, there are lots of benefits to bots and businesses. So it's not about a one-size-fits-all, let's block everything. We need to control what we want to interact with our infrastructure, what we don't. As well as Google, there are plenty of commercial opportunities out there that you may want a commercial partner to be scraping your information or something of that nature. So we need to give them access without hurting that commercial relationship. Your organization needs to understand bot traffic. You're getting attacked. Why are you getting attacked? How can you improve? And only by understanding the threat is the only way that you're going to ultimately stop that threat from damaging yourself. And what is your bot strategy? You need to understand, what's the impact to me? Is the impact loss of customers? Is the impact to my resource costs? So if we take that 19-20% in terms of the cost to infrastructure that bots are attributing to, if that is a large figure for you, maybe it is worth investing in more in your bot strategy to stop that money going to waste. And do you have not only a strategy for good and bad, but what about the ones that fit in between? So if I take those commercial examples there, sometimes you want to allow it to happen, but it just needs a think about that. But in closing this webinar, look, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from it. But the first step is to just understand what's happening on your infrastructure. If you want to speak with myself, if you'd like to speak with one of our solutions architects, please just get in touch. We'd be more than happy to offer a bot audit and just ultimately take that first step to seeing, do you have this problem? And ultimately, how big is this problem for your business? But thank you very much for attending today, and hopefully you've gotten something out of this.